Welcome to this explainer. There is a pretty well-known concept in the finance world called the three-generation wealth curse. It's this idea that the first generation builds the fortune, the second maintains it, and the third completely squanders it. Yet the Rockefeller family somehow dodged this curse entirely. So today we're going to break down the exact blueprint of how they built an enduring empire of money and influence that has lasted for over 150 years. Let's quickly run through our agenda. First, building the monopoly. Second, crisis and public redemption. Third, philanthropy and dark alliances. Fourth, expanding global power. And finally, the perpetual trust system.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, building the ultimate monopoly.
To understand how it all started, we have to look at John D. Rockefeller Sr. He basically took his grain-selling profits from the Civil War and brought this ruthless discipline to the total chaos of the early oil fields. When the first commercial oil well was drilled back in 1859, the industry was a complete Wild West mess of fluctuating prices. But Rockefeller, he didn't really care about drilling. He saw that the real power was in refining. So in 1870, he incorporates Standard Oil. Just a year later, he pulls off this secret deal with major railroads, the South Improvement Company, getting massive shipping rebates that his rivals literally couldn't touch. And he weaponized those secret deals to trigger what's now known as the 1872 Cleveland Massacre, buying out 22 of his 26 competitors in a mere 6 weeks. By the late 1870s, Standard Oil was an absolute colossus. We are talking about a 90% iron grip on the entire U.S. oil refining industry. That is massive. He basically controlled the kerosene that lit almost every single home in the country. But, as you might guess, absolute power brings absolute scrutiny. In 1904, journalist Ida Tarbell, whose own father had actually been ruined by Standard Oil's tactics, dropped a devastating expose. Her main thesis was simple and damning. The empire is built on coercion, not competition. She meticulously documented all those secret deals and predatory pricing tactics. Pretty soon, the public and eventually the federal government started seeing Rockefeller's incredible efficiency not as progress, but as ruthless predation. Which brings us to Section 2, crisis and public redemption. So the government finally struck back. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously to dissolve the Standard Oil monopoly, smashing it into 34 separate successor companies. But here is the wild irony of it all. The shareholders, including Rockefeller, received stock in all these new, highly profitable companies, like Standard of New Jersey and Standard of New York. The breakup actually caused the stock value to skyrocket. It tripled Senior's fortune, literally making him the world's first billionaire by 1913. Crazy, right? But wealth alone couldn't buy a good reputation, and that reputation hit rock bottom during the 1914 Ludlow Massacre. 21 people, including women and children, were killed during a strike at a Rockefeller-owned coal mine. Facing absolute public outrage, John D. Rockefeller Jr. totally pivoted. He completely abandoned his dad's strategy of silent, ruthless order. Instead, he traveled to the mines, hired public relations experts, listened to grievances, and literally danced with the miners' wives. He launched the Rockefeller Plan to improve conditions, essentially inventing modern corporate PR right then and there to save the dynasty. And Jr. didn't stop there. He used that inherited wealth as a massive branding tool. He poured millions into restoring colonial Williamsburg, funded major global medical research, and of course, built the iconic Rockefeller Center right in the middle of the Great Depression, putting thousands to work. He successfully flipped the script, transforming the tainted family name from a symbol of predatory greed into one of resilience and public good. Now for Section 3, philanthropy and dark alliances. Looking objectively at the historical record, we see a really stark duality here. By 1926, the Rockefeller Foundation had poured nearly $410,000 into the Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes in Germany. Now, on one hand, this immense wealth was funding legitimate science that helped eradicate global diseases like yellow fever and malaria. But on the other hand, some of these specific grants were also fueling psychiatric and anthropological eugenics programs in Germany. Now, they did pull their funding before World War II, but that early money helped build institutes whose scientists would later heavily influence devastating Nazi racial policies. Moving right along to Section 4, expanding global power. With the family names somewhat redeemed and their wealth totally secured, the Fur generation stepped up and pushed directly into the highest levels of government and global finance. You really see two diverging yet equally powerful paths with the founder's grandsons. Nelson was loud, charismatic, and deeply ambitious. He became a 4-term governor of New York as a liberal Republican and desperately wanted to be president of the United States. David, on the other hand, was quiet, methodical, and highly intellectual. He took the reins as CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank, flying all over the world, cutting international deals, and doing a lot of quiet diplomacy with heads of state. But Nelson's high-flying political ambitions eventually hit a tragic roadblock. In September 1971, over 1,200 inmates took over the Attica Correctional Facility in New York, demanding basic rights like better medical care. Nelson, wanting to project a tough law and order image for his presidential aspirations, flat out refused to visit the prison or negotiate directly. He sent in the state troopers, and it ended in an absolute bloodbath. 39 people died, including 10 hostages, mostly from law enforcement gunfire. It was a tragedy that permanently stained Nelson's political image. Meanwhile, David was quietly building unparalleled global influence. In 1973, he leveraged his vast banking network to team up with Henry Kissinger and form the Trilateral Commission. The core belief here was that private business elites and thinkers from North America, Europe, and Asia could coordinate global policy and provide stability when standard 4-year public political cycles failed. It was essentially a private club for the world's most powerful, unelected figures to shape global strategy. And finally, Section 5, the perpetual trust system. So, how exactly do they dodge that 3-generation wealth curse we talked about earlier? $10 billion, that is the collective net worth the Rockefeller family still holds today in the 2020s, spread out across more than 200 living descendants. The fortune hasn't just survived, it has steadily grown and adapted over 7 generations. And here is the exact, brilliant blueprint of how they do it, a perpetual trust system mostly anchored in South Dakota. First, John D. Rockefeller Sr. and Jr. set up irrevocable trusts in 1934 and 1952. Because they are irrevocable, the rules are locked in stone once the money is in. Second, these trusts are designed to skip generations, completely bypassing the brutal 40% federal estate taxes that usually decimate fortunes. And third, the family doesn't actually manage the money directly. They use professional managers at a global family office to conservatively invest the core assets, distributing about $50 to $100 million every single year. It perfectly shields the core wealth from taxes, lawsuits, divorces, and most importantly, spendthrift heirs. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Surviving 150 years is no accident. It requires a ruthless blueprint, massive public relations pivots, elite global networking, and ironclad financial structures. So if ultimate power requires both immense capital and ruthless structuring to survive generations, who in our modern era is quietly setting up the next 150-year dynasty today? Thanks for watching, and I'll see